Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the On Air Advocate, where we provide education, support, and empowerment for special needs families, caregivers, and those with different abilities, mental health challenges, and chronic illness. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Tammy Flynn, and I am the host and producer of the On Air Advocate. And I am super excited if you are here joining us this afternoon, or whether you are catching this on the replay. Now, as always, if you think any of the content that we are talking about today could be relevant from anyone in your network or your circle, please hit the share button and share the love with others. Well, if you guys have been following our social media lately, you know that we have kind of switched gears and we are focusing now on learning about bile duct cancer. And I am so excited to welcome for the first time to the show, Stacie Lindsey. She is the founder and CEO of CCF. And I'm so excited to have you here today, Stacie. I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Stacey, I'm so excited to have you here today and for you to share. You haven't been here on the show before, and I can't wait for you to share with the audience not only about the organization that you were the founder of, but about yourself. So why don't we just start right there?
Great. Thank you, Tammy. We appreciate the invitation. My name is Stacie Lindsey. I am the CEO and founder of the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation. It's sometimes referred to as bile duct cancer. I was born in California, but I grew up in Utah. I graduated from Brigham Young University with a degree in psychology. I have one brother and two sisters. There are 4 kids in our family. And when in 2005, my older brother, Mark, was running the St. George Marathon. He had some he was having some stomach problems. He thought he'd gone in during his training. He'd started to notice some things. He thought he had ulcers. So he went in and got that checked. They'd given him some medication and said, if this doesn't help, come back. And so he ran the marathon in the fall of 2005. And then about a week or so after, he went in to see his physician, and they did an ultrasound and could see tumors everywhere. And so they referred him to an oncologist. And luckily, the oncologist was able to diagnose him right away. And so he told him that he had cholangiocarcinoma, stage 4. So he and his wife, they had 3 children. His wife was pregnant with their 4th. She was about 2 months. Lucas is their youngest. He was born in November. So this was in October. And so he called us to come together as a family, and he and Marianne came and just, gave us the news that he had terminal cancer. There's not only not a cure, there were no treatments, no standard of care for this rare kind of cancer. And, we all burst into tears. And then, my nature, which is a little more black and white, mm-hmm. I just said, tell me exactly, what is it called? Spell it for me. What doctor did you see? I just wanted to get to the details, and I just went home and I just started Googling. And you just have to keep in mind, this is back in 2005. So I just started reading everything I could. There was not much information available. There were no websites, no support groups, nothing on the internet other than a couple of publications on PubMed, which is what doctors and researchers, scientists use to keep up to date on that. It's where all the published research goes. And frankly, I could not understand it. So I don't speak medical language. And but I could tell just from reading that it did not look good. Mm-hmm. So in my mind, I was having a really hard time reconciling how my 38-year-old healthy marathon running, exercising every day, eating healthy brother could be told that he had stage 4 terminal cancer. I could not reconcile that. And so that was kind of the catalyst for me really starting to dig into the research. I just wanted to give him some hope. And so we kind of came together as a family, and we split up the research. And one sister took nutrition, one took alternative therapies for cancer, and I took the medical research. And then Mark and Marianne were going to focus on their kids and their family and sort of keeping mentally healthy and physically healthy as he could. And so I went to every doctor's appointment with him. I would research all weeks or months in between his appointments. I would take, he was very lucky that he found a doctor who had who had been an academic at UCSF. He'd worked under Dr. Vanook and had seen cholangiocarcinoma patients before and had done some research. And so he was Mark's same age. So he had a lot of compassion for us and was very open. You know, he just said, I will read and take a look at anything you bring me. And so, you know, we'd research things, I'd print things off, I'd taken piles of things. And as a family, what we were doing behind the scenes is everybody would research during the week. And then on Sundays, we'd come together and we just lay out everything that we'd found. We'd kind of counsel together as a family, and then Mark and Marianne would have to take that and kind of make decisions. And so that's what we did. It was kind of all hands on deck, and, you know, we were working hard. In one of those early meetings, I was just saying, I need to be able to find I know there are other families that are struggling with this, and I need to get connected with them. And my brother-in-law, my youngest sister, Amy, her husband, Rick, said, you know, he had some website development experience, and he said, we'll put together a discussion board. So he put together a discussion board, and immediately we started getting patients from all over, not all over the United States, all over the world. Yeah. But they were young patients. Now, what we were told statistically was that this was a cancer for people 65 and older. The average age was like 68, 67, something like that. And so it was surprising that Mark was so young and had this cancer, but all of the patients that were coming onto the discussion board were young too. There was a 21-year-old, you know, and so we were like, well, you know, what's going on? Well, part of that is, right, 15 years ago, the internet is, you know, a place where young people are really kind of exploring. And so this kind of community started evolving, and we were just helping each other. It was like, okay, I'm being seen at MD Anderson, and this is what they have me on, and what's happening over here in New York at MSK, and what are you guys doing in Salt Lake City? And that's what we were doing. And we would organize calls. We were just supporting each other. All these families, we were all looking for answers and solutions and just hoping to see if anyone had any success stories. So it went from that. Mark lived about 16 months, and they were hard, like horribly hard, painful months. And then when he knew that kind of he was going to be going on hospice and that the treatment period would be over for him, we were coming home from his treatment, and he said, Stacie, what are you going to do with all of the information you've gathered, all of these people on the discussion board who need your help? What are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. And he said, I think we need to start a foundation. So that he said, not everyone will have families like ours, and these patients will need support. And I mean, I tell you quite frankly, I would have done anything that he asked, because, you know, so we went to his law firm. He was a lawyer, and he and my dad and I went in and we signed the paperwork, and we, you know, started setting things up. And we asked the people on discussion boards, do you have any family or friends that would like to join us and do this? We set up a board, and we just started to meet. And the first few years, you know, we were just gathering information. We were not, you know, we didn't have enough funding to really support research. And I mean, cancer research that's a lot of money. And so, we were just starting to, you know, interact with scientists and trying to figure out, is anyone doing any research in cholangiocarcinoma? And, you know, as we started to meet with the scientists and the researchers are the academics, the clinicians. And then they have the scientists that are the bench scientists that are doing the actual, like, working on the mouse models and, you know, with the tissue and things. And so we were working kind of both those angles and trying to figure out, how do we bring all of these things together? And one of the things that was very clear to me at the very beginning is that these institutions were starting to do a little bit of work, but they were very resistant to working together. And so as we started to move into funding research, as we started to have more families, more patients coming to us and wanting to fund research, you know, as we were looking at how do we do this, how are we going to, you know, in a rare cancer where you have, you know, about 10,000 new patients being diagnosed a year, it's very different from breast or prostate or lung where you have, you know, hundreds of thousands, you know, being diagnosed a year. And so institutions they don't need to share data in those big cancers, but when you have small, even the big academic centers, we're only seeing, you know, maybe 10 or 20 cases a year. Well, you're going to have to share data. And so what we decided to do was that collaboration would be one of our core values. And so we just started working with these institutions and working with these scientists. We wouldn't fund research unless they would work together. And what's happened over time in the last 15 years is that these researchers and scientists who are at, you know, 140 different institutions, you know, across the world have just become great friends and collaborators. And this is now it's not just the US collaborating, it's with Asia and Europe and all of these areas. We're all working together to solve this problem. And so, you know, just a lot of good things have happened in the last.
Come full circle. And I wanted to kind of back up a little bit when you were talking about your story in that very beginning, because obviously this is more of a rarer cancer than some of like the prevalent ones that you were speaking of. Was there the hospital your brother went to, were they considered that they were a little bit more on the leading edge of knowing about this type of cancer? Or did you, you know, start seeking out other hospitals and networks across the United States as you and your family were doing that research? Was there at that time, so 15 years ago or 16 years ago, and, you know, in 2005, was there a hospital at that time that was kind of the top notch on the cutting edge of knowing about this cancer, doing the most research?
Well, that's a good question. So there were publications in Japan that I was looking at when I was looking at those PubMed publications. And the Asian population, the Asia Pacific population, has cholangiocarcinoma a lot more than we have it here. And there are a couple different reasons for that. But, you know, we had tried to go to Huntsman to get him seen there. And they had only seen 2 cases that year.
Oh.
So I guess you have to decide, you know, does that feel like a specialist to you? You know, and at the time, it just, you know, when we saw them, they just didn't give us any kind of option or any kind of hope or any, you know, anything. So we went to Utah Cancer One, and the doctor there he had treated cholangiocarcinoma patients. And I think because he was Mark's age and had just a ton of compassion for him, he had young children too, he was just so open. And really what we were looking for is, you know, Mark, while resources were not an issue for Mark, having his wife pregnant with their 4th child and having 3 other children at home, you know, what we were balancing was, I mean, we were looking at, you know, dendritic cell therapy in Germany, or, you know, we had a very aggressive radiation oncologist in Mayo that we talked to, and he's like, yeah, we'll do a 6-week program. You know, he'd come stay here. We'll do all these different things. But when you just don't know that any of those things are going to work, you're really balancing, am I going to spend that time away from my family? Or am I going to, and that was a constant balance for Mark. And it was hard because we were trying to lay everything out on the table and trying to be really sort of careful about choices so that he didn't feel like he was abandoning his family for something that may not work anyway. So it was really tricky. I would say we had about the best scenario that we could for him. You know, but, and we were really happy with Dr. Wisnet and how he kind of helped us navigate that.
And what would you say, and I completely understand when you're saying, things were not what they are now on the website, like websites and just all of the different connections, 15 years ago. Would you say, what year did you feel like really things were picking up a little bit more research wise? That people, this is becoming more aware. You were getting more information within your organization, within this last 15 years. Is there been a pivotal year?
Yeah, there have been a couple. And I would say one was a sort of a paradigm shift in me. And that was about, I'd say 9-10 years ago. We were getting ready for our first conference in Salt Lake City. And I was getting ready to go out and talk with, we had brought together about 35 specialists from around the United States and really globally, to talk about who we knew were doing research and were interested in this cancer. And we were bringing them together to sit down in a room and say, okay, what's going on? What's not happening? What needs to happen? How can we, bridge some of these gaps? What kind of funding do we need for what kinds of specific projects? And so we kind of split into groups, and we were doing these working groups and trying to figure out these different ways that we could start working on this cancer together. And someone said to me when we were at that, Mark would be so proud of you, of what you've, and I was, how you're sort of thinking so I was kind of thinking about that. And I was thinking, what if Mark were alive today? So we're 7 years past. What if Mark were alive today? And nothing was different. There were no new treatments. There was nothing different. And I had sort of this like we can't just keep talking about things and sharing. We have to do something. We have to, we really have to make a difference here. And so that experience just sort of shifted something in me. And we started, what we started doing was putting together a formal medical advisory board and a scientific advisory board. And we started really working with them on exactly what do we need to do? How much funding do we need? What's going to make the biggest impact? Where are we going to get our biggest return on investment? All of these kinds of things. And we just started mapping things out. And the other thing that we started to do was we could not get any pharmaceutical companies had zero interest in us. And I mean, zero. Like, we were going to conferences and we'd pass out information and people would say, there's a foundation for cholangiocarcinoma. I mean, that's the kind of reaction that we were getting all the time. And companies were just not, I mean, there's a, it's a very tricky, there's a very high bar for these pharmaceutical companies to jump in. And so we started strategizing, how do we lower that bar so that pharmaceutical companies would be interested in developing drugs for these patients, because literally that is the only way that we're going to get new treatment options for them.
Right.
So when Mark was diagnosed in 2005, one of the first things we did was look at clinical trials. And in clinicaltrials.gov, there were 4 clinical trials, but they had all been closed for lack of accrual, which means they couldn't get people to go on to these clinical trials. Either there weren't enough patients, or there weren't enough institutions participating, or, whatever reason. So there was literally nothing for him to try. The environment today in cholangiocarcinoma is there are hundreds of clinical trials. And part of that is that we really worked hard to develop a strategy to help to push out information into these pharmaceutical companies. So what we were doing was looking at these adjacent cancers. So other GI cancers like pancreatic cancer, gallbladder cancer, liver cancer, and looking at different companies that were sort of looking at these bigger cancers and seeing what they were developing. And if we had anything in common with them, any biomarkers or mutations in common with them, then we would send them information and say, hey, we've got doctors and researchers and advocates and patients all willing and interested in drug development. So trying to get them to come take a look at this space. And we've been pretty successful with that. And so I think that was one of the really big pivot points, is when we really started targeting companies that we thought had good And we'd bring them in and have them talk with our medical advisory board. We will be giving them free access to these doctors were donating their time to help these companies understand the landscape of cholangiocarcinoma so that they could then make a decision if they wanted to further develop drugs or open a cohort or a group, a small clinical trial for these patients to see if the drugs worked on these patients. Huge. Like the sacrifices and the volunteerism that has happened on the side of our scientists and our medical professionals has been unbelievable in helping us move forward and really get access for these patients to so many experimental drugs that they can try and see if help. And now, in the last year and a half, we had 3 FDA approvals. We think we're very close to having a new standard of care, which means, for instance, if you look at breast or lung or any of these other, when you get diagnosed with one of those, it's like, okay, you have this type, this is, next week you'll go here, the week after you'll go here, this is what you do, right? You have sort of a map. That's what a standard of care is. And so we're hoping that we're going to be having a new updated standard of care for cholangiocarcinoma patients. There are a lot of things right now, a lot of clinical trials that the patients can try, and many of them with much better results than just Gem-Cis, which is our standard of care, which is a really kind of a difficult chemotherapy to be on. So.
Right. So at that year 7, kind of that mindset shift of what you had to focus on and how you guys changed that pattern, would you say that kind of the milestone moment has come in this 15th year, anniversary, for you guys, where now you finally see that, or did some of those FDA approvals come a few years ago? I mean, has it slowly been?
No, we've had a very poor standard of care and no FDA approved drugs until a year and a half ago. Okay. So, if you saw the timelines of those companies that have the FDA approvals and their interactions with the foundation, you would see, dozens and dozens and dozens, patient advisory boards, medical advisory boards, research advocates that we've trained carefully who could help them with their protocols to understand, patient education materials. We've been engaged with these patients from the very beginning when they were working on the protocols, which are the clinical trials, right? When they were very first working on clinical trials. So,
right. So these last few years have been very exciting in how forward this is moving. Yes. So from this point, we're wrapping up, obviously the end of 2021. What is kind of your forecast for the organization and the condition itself as you look to it in the future?
Well, so we just had something really interesting happen just a couple of weeks ago. And so immunotherapy is huge in cancer in general. And cholangiocarcinoma has been considered a cold tumor, which means it doesn't respond to immunotherapy. So there have been a lot of clinical trials, small phase 1 clinical trials that the cholangiocarcinoma patients have not done well, which means maybe like a 10 to 15% response in the patients. And so AstraZeneca announced that their new trial, which is an immunotherapy, which was done in South Korea, had the FDA actually stopped the trial because they had such good survival response that it was unethical for them to keep it in clinical trials. So we're hoping that the readout of that data will happen at one of these next big conferences. We're hoping January is GI ASCO, so we're hoping to see the data there. Okay. But that's very, very exciting for us because that means that they had a really significant, response rate or survival of these patients than they've seen previously in immunotherapy, and we've never had really good response at all. So we're really waiting to see the data on that. But that could signal a new standard of care for these patients. And so we're really hopeful. We're really excited to see that. And in January, we'll know the readout of the data, and we'll go from there. But I mean, that's like a whole, we've never we've never looked at immunotherapy at all because we just didn't have good responses. Right. So we focused on the targeted therapies and, new chemotherapy, triplets and different things like that. So
it is a very, very exciting time right now as things are moving forward. And I would love for you, before we wrap up today, to share a little bit about the organization itself, the foundation itself, and the different layers it has to it. Because I know you guys have like supportive services, you guys have events, you do an annual conference. Can you give the audience just a little bit about that background so they know, hey, if they get onto your website, the different things that they can find and engage in?
Sure. Thank you, Tammy. So we have kind of three things that we focus on. The first and the most important is patient advocacy and education. And our philosophy is that we don't promote any specific kind of drug or therapy or anything, but we want the patients to be educated about every option available to them, and then they can choose.
Right.
So patient education advocacy is first. The second is we have a research network, and we focus a lot of time and energy on that. And that is where the clinicians, the global cholangiocarcinoma clinical community come together. They work together, they collaborate together, they share data, they do clinical trials. We bring in companies to talk with them. That's that piece. And then we also have the basic science. And these are the bench scientists, again, who are, working in the labs and trying to figure out if certain drugs work on certain kinds of tissue and these kinds of things, the pre-work that's done before it gets to the patient. And there's several things there. We fund research fellowships there. We have to pull in the most innovative, smart, forward-thinking, visionary young scientists that we can, and the science follows the money, unfortunately. And so when we were raising money, we're raising money to support this research that helps us know how we're going to get new treatments for patients. And so this year was kind of a banner year for us because we're funding 9 research fellowship awards. So that's $50,000 for 9 individual young, innovative scientists who will be working in this field. And that's part of our goal on the basic science side, is to really expand the amount of the amount of scientists that are coming in and doing really excellent work. We really want to see good work being done here. So we focus on those 3 things.
Okay. And where would someone go to reach out to you? Your website?
They would go to the website, which is cholangiocarcinoma.org.
Okay.
So,
and we will drop that below this video on our live stations, as well as on any other social media applications. So it'll be easy for others to access. And in wrap up, is there anything, Stacey, that you would like to leave the audience with today?
Oh, I think oftentimes we think about, the big cancers, you hear about them all the time, and the fundraising and all of the, the pink everywhere, and so important. But you just have to think sometimes of those smaller cancers that get completely left behind because there's not a lot of, we don't have, famous people who've experienced them. We don't have, we don't have spokespeople. But so many of these cancers are devastating for people. I mean, absolutely devastating. And, we have to think about treatment options for everyone who has cancer. And, and I think for cancer in general, there's a lot of hope on the horizon, a lot of great science going on, a lot of really great data integration, big data and AI and all of these kinds of things that we've been hopeful about for a long time. And I think we're really starting to see some of those building blocks kind of getting into place, some of those puzzle pieces fitting together so that we can use that data to really make inroads into some of these cancers. So.
Yes. And I know that you guys are having an annual conference in February, correct?
Yes, February the 23rd through the 25th. And that's when the entire global cholangiocarcinoma community comes together in Salt Lake City, Utah. We have a patient day, and then we have 2 scientific days, and it's fantastic. It'll be in person this year. There is a virtual option as well, and you can find all of that on the website.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Stacie, you are truly an inspiration and showing, you know, what can happen, you know, with passion and purpose behind what you're doing. And I'm thankful for organizations like yourself that are helping to support different communities. And with that, thank you for joining us today on the show.
Thank you, Tammy. I appreciate being here.
And if you guys want to know any more about the On Air Advocate, you can head on over to onairadvocate.com and find all of our resources there. Thanks again, Stacie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.